What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning into The Standard. Today's guest is literally my biggest mentor of all time, Dan Pfaff. I know he's probably been everyone's biggest mentor, but I've been super fortunate to get to know him for over the last 8 years. Dan doesn't need an introduction. Right now, he's consulting with pretty much every professional sport. He's won 27 national championships at LSU, and he's been the biggest mentor for our company, and we would not be where we're at if it weren't for Dan. Dan's gift is, I think, the ability to make something extremely complex simple. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And moving forward on the series of podcasts, we're going to really try to get into the practical application of what Dan does, what these coaches do when they're in the field. And I can't wait to get into it. You always answer when I call. Every time from the beginning, email, call, you always answer. And I know you have so many people hitting on you, you know what I mean, and getting after you. You know what? Why do you always answer? And why do you always, how can you help everyone?
Well, my grandfather was a German immigrant, and he kind of taught him parables. And one of his parables, if you want a lake to remain clear, you need inflow and you need outflow. And I think, sadly, a lot of coaches, performance people, you know, they take a lot in and then they don't share the wealth. They have the secret sauce or the magic potion, so they don't give it away. And 53 years of coaching, you know, I haven't found too many secrets. You know, it's just repackaged or recentered or whatnot. So I want to keep my lake clean, so every opportunity I have to give, you know, I do. It's kind of a servant leader mindset, if you will.
I love it. One of our biggest core values here is serving. You know what I mean? Is putting the athlete's interest in front of our own. And for me, I feel like with the company, like as soon as I started putting my coaches' interest in front of my own too, we just grew tenfold. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which has been a game changer for us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, selfishly, the more you give, the more connections you make. So you expand your network. It becomes more diverse, more layered. And generally, if you've vetted well, the person that you're giving a lot to, they give back. They share things, you know, it might be case studies or puzzles, and we collaborate on the puzzle, and then we both learn something new. So it's not just one-sided where I'm giving away. I think the foundational tenet of mentorship is it's a two-way street, and I don't mentor people really well that just take. You know, I like to mentor people that give back. So when it's a give and take process, then that's a lot more enjoyable. And, you know, selfishly, I get more out of it.
Right. Along with that, so you've been interviewed or podcast or people asking you questions thousands of times. What do you think is one of the questions that nobody ever asks you that you feel like is missing that somebody should be asking you?
Well, at this stage of my career, and, you know, being 71 years old, you're kind of in that mentorship role. And I think, you know, we throw that term around a lot, but I don't think people understand the layers of mentorship and what's involved. It's not just directing someone under you, you know, like do this or do it better or do it different. You know, there's a layer and a process and a journey that you go through there. You know, like, do you support them? Do you introduce them to other people so they can expand their network? You know, do you promote them? Do you help them get jobs? Do you stay in touch? You know, so there's a lot of moving parts in a mentorship thing. So I think a lot of times the question that's not asked is, A, what is mentorship? And then what is the process of mentorship? And how do you define really good mentorship?
With Coach Tellez was your biggest mentor.
Yes.
What were some of the biggest things that you've still used today that you took from him years ago?
Well, Coach T was an ultimate teacher. He was a PE teacher. He's classically trained in PE. He taught PE in the military. So he came at sport from a physical education background, which doesn't exist these days. You know, everything's kinesiology or sports science. So he was really grounded in pedagogy, you know, the art of teaching, the science of teaching, a master of applied biomechanics. You know, he introduced me to a book by Jeff Dyson called Mechanics of Athletics. That was his Bible. It's now my Bible. I read it every year. And so his understanding of physiology and biomechanics and teaching made him a very unique individual. And he was pretty intimidating because it's kind of like standing beside Einstein every day. He'd say stuff and you're like, I have no idea what he's saying. So you'd go home. Or well, back then it wasn't internet, so you'd go to the library and try to figure out what he was saying. So he had the ability to teach just beyond your grasp, where, you kind of knew it, but you had to go out there and dig a little bit deeper to get grounded. And he'd throw me in the deep end of the pool. Sometimes there might be a walk-on guy that he couldn't get to because he was with another group, and he'd go, we're working on this, go over and work on that. And he's always got his head on a swivel, and he's like, what were you seeing? What did you do? What did you try? Why? So it wasn't just a top-down fire hose process. So he probably not only gave me a foundation for coaching, especially in track and field, but probably kind of lit that fire for mentorship, kind of defined what it should be.
I love it. Give you a little autonomy to figure it out on your own with the framework for it. That's super hard. I feel like I want it to be my way. I want it to be done this way, you know what I mean? But you got to let them figure it out because every coaching style is different too.
I think good mentors are patient. You got to let it, failure is a bad word in our current state. It's a negative. And I'm constantly telling athletes and coaches and performance people, failure is a springboard to more learning or to solutions. It's not a negative. I mean, coaching in essence is a scientific method. So you make a hypothesis, you develop a plan, you run it, you collect some info, data, you assess that, and you either keep it, tweak it, or you throw it away, right?
Right.
Well, most scientific tests are failures. And that's how you refine and reboot and reorganize and go a different way. So I think we got this failure idea wrong. It's just like, okay, that's one strike, we're not out. And so I think that's probably another problem or a question that's not asked is like, what's your stance on failure and why do you embrace failure rather than treat it as a negative?
Right. With athletes too, when you get an athlete, and I've heard you talk about certain situations, when you get an athlete that say they have to play in a week or say that the Olympics is in 10 days and something bad just happened.
Yep.
And you have no time and shit has hit the fan. What do you choose to focus on and what's your communication look like with that staff and then, more importantly with that athlete?
Well, I think the first step is define where we're at. So what's going on? What are possible drivers for what's going on? What are possible solutions for toning down those drivers a little bit? How do we get things under control a little bit? Do a fair assessment so that the athlete knows there's risk. We're now in a mitigation period here.
Right.
We're trying to mitigate what's going on. They're not going to be perfect in 10 days. But can we get them to 90%? And then they rely on their past training, the money put in the bank, their experiences and whatnot, and maybe they pull it off. And sometimes, because expectations are lowered because of this, the athlete actually excels what anybody thought possible because the pressure is off now. They're no longer...
They have an excuse.
Yeah, they got a parachute. So sometimes parachutes are positives. But I think assessment where you're at and trying to figure out what's going on, what's driving the situation, how did we get here, and then possible solutions, and then making sure everybody's speaking the same language and working the right way, and kind of avoid the pink cloud syndrome, like, oh, you're going to be fine, it's going to be wonderful, it's the Olympics, and it's going to be Disneyland, we don't go there. But we're not going to catastrophize, oh shit, 4 years down the tube, like, so sorry. We got to find that middle ground where there's, our mission at that point is help and hope.
Right. When you're getting, I guess even in those situations, but other situations, when you're getting data, and especially with the new tech, but you have had so much experience and your intuition and your gut, when those don't align with what the medical staff, what the tech is telling everyone, but you have a gut feeling on another view, How do you attack that, and how do you handle that situation?
Well, some of it depends on, am I the gatekeeper? If I'm the gatekeeper, then I'm going to make the final decision, and I'm going to explain why I'm making the decision, and if people aren't comfortable with that, they have the option to get off the bus.
Yep.
And we'll bring somebody on the bus that's willing to roll the dice. I mean, when you're in a mitigation emergency like that, you're going to take a risk every day, every menu item during that day. You're taking risks. So I need risk takers on there because we've all agreed we're going to try to go. The athlete understands the risk. Everybody's like, okay, it's worth a shot, and I want everybody like on that bus.
Right.
So if I get a medical opinion or a data opinion that doesn't line up with where I'm thinking, then we're going to have deeper conversations. Like, okay, the data says this, but there's instances where the data said this, and it really didn't move the ball forward. Or there's case studies out there that say, like there's skiers that have skied in the Olympics with no ACL. Right? It defies all the studies, all the possibilities or whatnot. I mean, the human body's an amazing compensation machine, so there's ways to work around stuff. I had an NFL player play 8 years in the league with no semimembranosis. It evolved off the bone. It was ruptured. He was a defensive back. He was all pro 3 years without a major hamstring.
That's crazy. That's nuts.
So you find workarounds.
What about the other way around when you're getting, say force plate data and GPS and everything saying that they are cleared, and they say this isn't a short window of time, but they are cleared, but you don't think that the athlete's ready to come back.
So
biodynamics, all that, we deal with that all the time where it's like, oh hey, they hit the strength.
So I think assessment exists on a spectrum, if you will. So you have clinical assessment, where the orthopedic or osteo or radiologist or the PT or whatever is doing radiology review and clinical test and whatnot. And then I'm in the Olympic final. So those tests are static, the athlete's not moving. So, you can get into layers like ultrasound will give you a little bit more actionable information than an MRI, because MRI, you're stationary. Ultrasound, you can move. So, where are we at on that? And, how valuable is that at that point in time? And, does it really matter? And so a lot of times where I'll say, whoa, wait a minute, is, when we're assessing real world open chain high cognitive load, they may pass the weight room test. They may test linear running, but say we got a field court person and we put them through serpentine runs or circular runs, and we see, the wheels are coming off. We're like, okay, we're here, but we're not ready to go to the Olympics. So, where are we at in this assessment protocol? So I think there's probably an over-reliance on clinical or scientific assessments and not enough, and it's kind of young science. Not everybody has a coach's eye or the ability to look at video. Like this week we were, working on several clients, and we videoed from behind and from head on and from the side, getting multiple perspectives. Because there's things you're going to see from behind you'll never see with a side view, and there's things you'll see head on you'll never see with those other two. And if you got an axial view, even better. There's 3 axes to the body. So my woes are usually in this late stage return to play, where we've gone from closed chain test and task, and they green light. But now we go a little more open chain, and it gets a little dicier. And then we go to high cognitive load, where they're reacting. Maybe it's in practice or a scrimmage or a game.
Yep.
And, with AI and machine learning, now we have the ability to measure a lot of things in a game or in a practice. So we're getting there. But that's a real young science. And that's, not everybody's skilled in, looking for those parameters that AI is giving us or that machine learning is giving us. And the problem with some of this AI is garbage in, garbage out. Are they measuring the right things? Because we all have biases on what we measure. So my pushback, long story short, usually is there's something I'm seeing in their movement signature. So we use the term movement signature. How does the athlete move in their sporting task? You know, beginning of the season, mid-season, late season, we get these maps when they're fresh, you know, early in the week, when they're tired at the end of the week. And so we have this bandwidth allowance that if they're within that bandwidth, we green light them, say we're okay, you know, there's some decay here, but it's expected. It's the end of the week. We can live with that. The injury risk is not that great, and the performance decay we're getting is expected because, you know, we're loading the athlete. When you get outside that bandwidth, and that's my decision maker, is the chronic injury report or the acute injury report increasing, or is the decay of output really decreasing? Well, now we got a problem. And so how do you measure in real time these open chain, high cognitive load movements and activities? Because if you don't measure it, how are you making decisions?
You've been coaching for so long, and there was no tech. How did you measure that? Because that is one of the hardest things to measure.
Yeah. Well, I've got a pretty good coach's eye, but it's not infallible. So, you know, I've always relied on video. I mean, even way back when I started, it was Super 8 film.
Yeah.
It was a cartridge you put in a camera and you filmed them. And then you took the cartridge out and you went to the drugstore and then you waited a week for it to get developed. And by then that problem had disappeared or got a lot worse. And then I had a hand crank projector with a fan blowing on it so the film wouldn't melt. And I'd stop and then, you know, I'd take onion skin paper and trace the athlete and then take the paper off, protractor, and draw the lines and angles.
Just find a way. Just make it happen.
Biomechanics were a lot harder in the 70s than they are now. Now you just push a button and you get 20 layers of measurements.
God, we're bitching about time now and how long it takes to crop a video and
yeah. So my master's thesis, I did an angle analysis of NCAA pole vaulters in the finals, and I measured at touchdown on every step of the run what were the body angles, the elbow angles, knee angles, the pole angle, and all of that. So I did touchdown. So if they ran 16 steps, I had 16 measures, and there were 18 people in the final.
That's crazy.
And it was all, you know, like projected on a wall, onion skin, trace the athlete, lay it down, draw the lines of the body segments, and measure angles with a protractor.
Yeah, for everyone listening, this week when we were filming the athletes, just how simple you made it. I feel like we were making things so complex. And like I said in the intro, one of your gifts is making the complex simple. But just filming those walking views, 10 yards, three different ways, and then showing it to the athlete right away, even with the younger athletes that we were working with, like the changes are so fast. And in an hour session, you can still get a ton done, and it doesn't take away from that. And I feel like we've always thought we just made it make more work than it really was, you know what I mean? And doing that and making that simple was a huge light bulb for our whole company.
So I think we use the term granularity. Like, how granular do you need to be with your information collection to make an informed decision, a good action point? So if I got a middle school athlete that's kind of like Bambi and they're all over the place and they got, you know, real low power and strength capabilities, do we need a force stack? Like, let's get basic movements down, you know, body control and things like that. So, you know, we talk about that pyramid of physical literacy at the base and then global sport literacy in the middle and sport-specific literacy. So that would be an example of a granularity decision. So I don't need high-speed film with that middle school kid running, you know, video head-on side. I'm going to get a lot of information, like, are they over-leaning? Are they leaning backwards? Are they leaning to the side? Are their legs going all over the place? Where are their feet? Can they control the body movements?
Right.
I don't need biolab or force stack or machine learning to make an informed decision. So maybe the complexity that you're using is appropriate with a rock star athlete that's fighting a very unique puzzle, and the global information is not making a difference. So yeah, you go another layer. But I think people like to go deep because it makes them seem educated and, you know, they're the white knight and they save the day. when a lot of times when you go deep, you just got more variables, and now you're like, well, what are we working on here?
You have an incoming freshman group in college. What's the main, say they're football athletes, American football, what's the first layer that you're looking at?
Well, I don't do a lot of testing. You know, I gave up on testing decades ago, but as they're going through the menu, the training menu, I'm looking at physical literacy capabilities. So, you know, everybody's got their little checklist on what are physical literacy. So I'm kind of judging it. These guys lacking any of these big physical literacy abilities. And then global sport literacy with things like starting, accelerating, upright running, change in direction movement, you know, various change in direction things. Those would be kind of global. And then it would be the same thing in the weight room. You know, as we go through the weight room exercises, what are they good at? Where are they struggling at? And all of that. So it's kind of a SWOT analysis in vivo, you know, while they're doing the real deal.
Right.
And then that would cause me to bucket guys. So I'd say, okay, you know, maybe I bucket DBs and safeties, and then linebackers and tight ends, and then interior linemen, and then, you know, DNs and quarterbacks and another thing. And then that would kind of drive some of my programming or my sports medicine interventions based on, you know, DBs get certain injuries that nose guards don't.
Right.
So
in those buckets, say we took a DB and an O lineman. What are like some of the main characteristics that you see are different between the two?
So an interior lineman, absolute strength is way bigger variable. Size is a way, you know, they got to keep mass. They got to have a high level of absolute strength. They've got to have a high ability to express power in a short period of time. Where a DB is more on the running side of things, their ability to run and change in direction at high velocities. So the DB is more of an elastic skill, mobility, agility kind of athlete, where the interior lineman is more combative and absolute strength and power and short burst type activity.
And you still work on a lot of the sprint mechanics with the bigs, and I've seen that. On the sprint side of things, what do you see the biggest difference between those two athletes?
Well, I think because interior linemen have a training bias, they've done 8 million two-step starts, three-step starts before engagement, and they've done millions of those. So there's a training bias. They're really good at getting in a stance, getting out of that stance, maybe a great first, second step.
Because they live there.
Yeah, they just do it all day long.
Yep.
But, you know, in the modern game now with these mobile quarterbacks like in the NFL, you know, I got nose guards running 20 yards laterally chasing a quarterback and then 20 yards downfield still chasing him. So in those 40 yards, he's probably going to need to be upright and know how to sprint in upright position. And if you compare the magnitude of starts and big horizontal force application that they have, and then you compare it to the bucket they have for upright running, I mean, there's a big difference.
Right.
So are we developing tissue tolerance and work capacity for upright running? So if you're playing Mahomes and you're an interior lineman, you better have some capacity for upright running because you're going to do a lot of upright running.
Yeah. When we were working with Matt and a lot of my NFL guys, we started working on the upright running, and everything was, even if we weren't sprinting at top speed, but even just working on the dribbling at top speed and getting to a speed to where it was not super intense on them, where we can kind of push the volume a little bit. The strength and the mobility they got in their hips and how much easier it was for them to get into those positions was crazy. And they've never trained there, ever. Because they're 300 pounds.
I'm at a stage of the career where I'm the home for the lost, the broken, the homeless. You know, I'm the last chance saloon.
That's why you're here.
So I get a lot of those guys. And it's amazing to me. I had 3 university linemen that I was called in to work with this summer. And all three guys are projected first 3-round draft picks, and they're all outside D linemen. And I watched them start, and they had no idea how to start. Two of the guys were four-point starts. One was a 3-point start, but none of them knew how to project, how to create a good excursion angle. Excursion angle is how far does the center of mass travel during that initial step, and the velocity that they're traveling at. And that's what coaches call, he's got a great first step. So, they didn't know how to do that. And it was real irregular, it wasn't consistent or whatnot. So we went over the ABCs of starting, and then we went over the ABCs of accelerating, and then we went over the ABCs of upright running. And all three of these guys were kind of in a rehab motif. So we just did the dribbles, and the idea there is we're giving them context so that when they do sprint, they kind of know how to control their body, their posture, apply force more vertically. So when you're upright, you're applying more vertical force than you are when you're starting. When you're starting, horizontal wins, but when you're upright, vertical had better win. And they didn't know what stacked meant. They didn't know how to push up. When they got upright, they would just keep pushing down the track. So their toe-off distance was huge, and they'd swing the foot way out in front of them. Their touchdown distance was huge. They're basically overstriding, going nowhere, because they didn't know the ABCs of upright running. So my first stop, so all three guys at the end said, all three came from a really hot high school, 5A, 6A champs in Texas, which big S&C staff. They were at a university that had probably 10 guys on the S&C staff, and they go like, why has no one ever taught us how to run? And then the next day we went through change in direction stuff, and they didn't even know the ABCs of change in direction. So these guys are 3 projected first 3-round draft picks, and they didn't even know the essentials. So kind of that first stop is, do you know the ABCs? And a lot of people don't.
When you in a day like that, and then the next day you go to the change direction, and you have a short window with them in the summer, for your incubation period for them to get that transfer, are you not so worried about trying to get in the sport specific side of things, or you just let's just get the ABCs down, and I'm hoping that transfers there? I'm
meeting them where they are. Cool. So like if they don't know the fundamentals, then we got to spend some time to incubate that, and then once they have the fundamentals, then we're going to segue into more closed chain challenges. And then if they master that, then we're going to go into more open chain, higher cognitive load. But in the return to play process, or the educational process, educationally our heuristic is simple to complex, slow to fast. And so you have to earn the right to go to the next level. So we call it a mastery-driven process. So whether it's a return to play puzzle or it's a teaching puzzle, we're not going to exceed their grasp so far they don't have the ability to execute. So if you don't have the ability to ascertain where your posture is, like you're excessively leaning forward or excessively leaning backwards or excessively leaning to the side on one side, like what are you doing? Like, that's foundational. Like, do you know where your body is? And then, awareness of pelvic orientation, or what their legs are doing, or the movement of their legs. And that's why we like the dribble series. We think it teaches segmental awareness. Does dribbling transfer to running fast? No. Does it have contextual transfer to running fast? Yes, because the athletes learn where their feet are, where their shin is, where their thigh is, where their hips are, where their torso is, where their head position, how they're using their arms, how they're using their legs. It gives them a lot of reps on learning what I call segmental awareness.
I love it. That's the dribbles at the upright and top speed it's part of our warm-up every day. Doesn't matter what sport really we're working with.
Well, and dribbling is a great plan B tool. So we've got guys, with a hamstring ding or issue, and, dribbling's going to be less stress than sprinting.
Yep.
Because dribbling, in essence, is modifying gait. You're reducing the risk, the range of movement of gait so that you reduce risk.
I love it. What do you see with young coaches? So you told me when you go to a professional organization, they'll pay you just to come audit.
Yeah.
You've been here now for a week. We're young coaches, you know what I mean? What are we missing? What can we do better? What's the thing that you feel like young S&C performance guys, that we're missing? I'm not sensitive. Let me have it.
Yeah. Well, I think you've done a good job of educating your staff, and I think you got layers of assessment. It's always about expertise and man hours. How do you grow the expertise of your staff, and how do you control man hours? So assessments, say you got a group of 40, well, your assessment protocol is going to be different than if you're training 3 people.
Right.
So how do you build out layers of assessment? Okay, when I'm working with 40 people, I got to bucket these guys. And then when this group goes, I'm looking for this. And when this group goes, I'm looking for that. And this group goes, I may be looking for something that I wasn't looking on those. So how do you build the appropriate assessment capability for the task or the group that you're working with, stage of development? Like, you got a middle school group. Posture and, like leg control is probably going to be your 2 big drivers, right? So you don't have to get real esoteric on what you're assessing. Where you got a university rock star soccer player, now your assessment's going to be a lot more complex. Chances are they kind of know the ABCs, but because of injury or lack of focus, they're not moving in the most appropriate way. And so now your assessment, your feedback loop is going to be a lot more detailed and precise. So I'd say just continued growth in expertise and assessment would be the 2 big things. It's not a negative, it's just where you're at.
Yeah.
I think things that I noticed, everybody's kind of speaking the same language. That's good. In a lot of organizations, you don't. It's very siloed. So the medical people are saying things, and the PT are saying something else, and the S&C staff saying something else, and the sport coaching staff has no clue what these other 3 towers are saying. And that's where we get into the bridge building things. How do we build a bridge between those silos so that everybody's speaking the same language, aware of the problem, aware of what we're trying to do solution-wise? Where are we at on this transition? And, I'll beat the drum again. Don't transition a person until they show consistent mastery at whatever you're challenging them with.
I think that's a weakness of ours because you want to get to the next step, or you want to get there. You want to make the kid feel like they're winning, you know what I mean? And I think that's the art of the coaching, where it's like we have to make them take pride in doing the little things right, be okay with not moving ahead even though somebody else is. And I think sometimes when a group's moving forward and we just move somebody along with them because it's easy, like that's definitely something that as a whole we need to get better at, including myself.
Well, I think it's an inherent problem when you run a training center that has diverse sports and diverse age groups and whatnot. Kids and parents are watching Instagram and social media, and they see all this, bell and whistle and sexy stuff, and you're over here doing ABCs, and they're like, I'm paying money for this? And, they don't understand the power of foundational movement. So how do you educate parents and athletes that, hey, I know this is sexy and we'll get there, but you got some gaps in your toolbox right now that we need to fill in, or when we try to get sexy, you're going to be disappointed.
100%. Yeah. I think there's an art to it too, because a kid, especially in the private sector, right? A kid, they're paying for it.
Yeah.
They have to enjoy it as well, and they're seeing this guy over here doing that, and they're wondering why they're not,
It's like we were talking with the staff the other day, like give them 10 minutes of sex so they feel like, they satiated that desire, but, and the important stuff really bear down and do good work there.
Right.
So it's kind of into that discussion of microdosing. So, how do you microdose a little bit of social media saturation, into the program? Or, athletes have a security blanket. They have something that really makes them feel they're ready or they're good. And so it might be absolute strength. So in football, everybody wants a big bench and a big squat, and if they don't hit that number, they don't feel they're ready. So that's their security blanket. So how can we microdose absolute strength where we don't destroy the training week or their health or whatnot, where they feel and they see that number staying there, they feel okay with it, but you're not selling the house trying to feed their security blanket.
Right. So if you were building your own high-performance staff right now, whether it's a professional organization or private sector, what are the first, like if this was the Dan Pfaff organization, what are the first systems you'd put in place that you think you can't live without?
Bedside manner would probably be number one. Can you communicate and get people on side?
Nobody talks about that. Where could they learn that? Where did you learn that? Is that, through experience? So that's the best way.
I made a million mistakes. When I was a young coach, I mimicked coaches around me. So I was military, top down, my way or the highway. And I lost a lot of kids that way. They stayed, but I lost them. And, I write apology notes on Christmas cards every Christmas, 50 years back. And I'm like, dude, I'm sorry. Like, we could have done that a lot better.
That's awesome.
So bedside manner is big. And, like Brett Bartholomew does a really good job on that kind of stuff, communicating. Like buy-in's kind of a cliche term, but I call it, how do you get guys on side? How do you get them seeing, the picture and the paradigm and how we're going to do it and how we're going to move? And I think a lot of that comes from having a great debrief process. So we're big in debriefs. So that'd be another thing I'd look on the staff. Like, do you understand the power of debrief? What are your debrief methodologies? How do you have layers? So we have year-end debrief, 3-page thing that the athlete fills out and the staff fills out on that athlete. We have, time of year debrief. So again, kind of a formal debrief. So it might be preseason, mid-season, end of season. And then you'd have different menu items you'd be asking questions about or assessing. And then we have weekly debriefs, and then we have daily debriefs, and we all do that. At the end of the workout, hopefully you're saying, how do you think it went? What did you like? What didn't you like? What did you understand? What didn't you understand? So there's a little bit of art. Do you do formal or do you do informal? I think good coaches do a good induction. Athlete comes out, they watch them move, they listen to how they're talking, how they're reacting. And then maybe ask some questions like, how sore are you? Where are you sore? How'd you sleep? What's going on in school? So
simple stuff.
Induction is important. Debrief is important. So my staff, it's kind of getting into skill sets. So can they communicate? And then can they assess? And then the next layer would be more sport-specific assessment. Do they know what a good lift is or what good running is or whatnot? Do they have a technical model that they rely on? And can they see when that technical model is being violated? And then how do they build strategies to get that person back on track? So those would probably be big ones. Developing coach's eye is important, whether it's video review or kinograms or live. Can they see what's going on?
Right. When looking back for you have the best coaching guy in the world. It's like
Coach Tellez makes me look like kindergarten.
For you, would you, if you were mentoring yourself back when you were 30 years old, what would you do differently with you? With the success that you've had coaching and the eye that you have, what do you look back and, what would you have told yourself back then?
Well, I was pretty fortunate. I had a great mentor in Coach Tellez, and then I had some really good peer mentors, Lauren Seagrave and Gary Winkler and Vern Gambetta and Bob Myers and Phil Lundeen, so we were all young guns and we were all pretty versed in science and motion and movement and diversity of sport experiences and all of that. So I was really fortunate. And, I still have guys that I call them accountability partners. So I talk to on a regular basis, and they're like, Dan, you're going down a rabbit hole. Like, you need to stop. 3 weeks and we're having the same conversation. Like, you need to take a breather and step back. So I think that's another important thing with the peer mentorship, or maybe your mentor, if he has time, or having diverse mentors, is to let you know, like, you're off the rail.
Yeah.
So that would be another question on staff induction, is like, who are your mentors? How diverse is it? So like, I have mentors in management. I have mentors in military training. I have mentors in radiology. I have mentors in surgery. I have layers of surgeons, like shoulder surgeons, elbow surgeons, knee surgeons, foot surgeons. And so like, I have 5 sport radiologists that I think are rock stars. So if I get an MRI report or I look at MRI slides and I'm like, I'm not sure, I'll send it off to those 5. And if all 5 come back saying it's this, then they're like, okay, it's this. This is where we're going to go. If it's 3-2, then I'll send out another email and say, well, what about this and what about that, until we get a consensus, and then boom. So there's a little bit of an art how to use your network, but I think there's a tendency to build what I call a bubble network. You get people in your network where you're all kind of on the same page and you're not drawing from other disciplines. And I'm a history buff and military history, and primarily 20th century. And there was probably earlier in that, probably 19th century, there was a Prussian general named von Clausewitz. And he wrote a book called The Art of War. It's not the Asian one. And it was just the manual on how Prussian armies fought for decades, and maybe still, some of those. And one of the things that really stood out to me is, like, no general is perfectly prepared for a battle. Shit's going to happen you didn't expect. So the best generals are the ones that are good at contingencies. If X happens, we're going to do Y. If Z happens, we're going to do R. If T happens, we're going to do Q. So that's another thing that I ask in developing staff is, how good are you at contingencies?
Plan Bs.
Yeah, plan B. Plan B didn't work. What's plan C? Plan C didn't work. So I got a guy and he's a little tender in the hamstring. We try to do the running workout. Okay, he's kind of guarding. I don't like his body language. We're going to do the rest of the workout dribbling. Okay, we tried to dribble and he's still kind of defensive. Okay, we're going to do this workout on the bike. So what are your contingencies? So every menu item should have a plan B, a plan C.
Right.
I think if you got to cease that menu item, you totally blew it. Like, it shouldn't have been in there.
If you just get rid of it, they come up and say, hey, I can't do this because my back hurts. And you're just like, okay, don't do that. It was pointless to be in there anyways.
Yeah.
The plan B thing with the dribbling and just alternate movements with large groups, with our college groups and stuff like that, has been an absolute game changer for one, so they keep the continual growth, but I think more this, because if they're just sitting in the corner and not doing anything, or they don't feel like they're able to do what their peers are doing, it just makes the injury even 10 times worse.
Yeah, and I think once you get good at contingency planning, then it improves your creativity. So I was a high school coach in Ohio, and it's 20 below zero and snow up to here, and the wind's 50 miles an hour, and I'm a track coach, and I got a hallway that's 60 yards. And I got milers and 2 milers and sprinters and jumpers. I'm like, I got 40 kids, and I got one hallway, and that's 60 yards. Like, what am I going to do? So that's where we started doing, like, up-back intervals. So now we call them HIT.
Yeah.
So the quarter milers would do 50 down, turn right around, 50 back, turn right around, until we did whatever distance we would have done if we were outside. And
scheduling that out through a day with that many different types of runners was fun.
So what was interesting, I started noticing, hey, my kids did better when we finally started the season than when we were in season doing the normal workouts. I'm like, maybe those HIT workouts are better than the intervals that we're doing. So I had a lot of those aha moments.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
When it comes to injuries, this is where, like I said in the intro too, trying to get a little bit more on the practical side of things. When you get an injury, in a general stance, I think we're going to try to dive into the ACL a little bit, but what are the first KPIs and what are the first questions that you're asking about the injury? Like, what are the KPIs you're going to look through that process, and what are the first questions you're asking?
Well, it's probably going to go further than that. So, like we had a couple clients here. So I asked about surgery history. What surgeries have you had? What injuries, what are chronic, and maybe it was later in, so the girl on the table, like, working on her ankles. I'm like, you have a lot of ankle sprains. Yeah, and I had
Surgery.
And I'm like, oh, well, that, and I'm thinking one way now with that information. I'm thinking in another way. So I think doing a real good vetting process, on, okay, this person standing before me, do I know what went on before?
Right.
Because that would influence maybe why they're there. Then I'm going to ask them to move, so it might be walking. If they can dribble, it might be dribbling. So I'm going to put them through some movement, lateral movements, backward movements. I like lateral and backwards because kids don't know how to cheat because they're not used to doing it. So you get a real honest picture of what's really going on. And so I'm going to put them through various movement tasks and assess, what's positive, what's really negative, what's kind of no big deal. And then that will start the refinement of the decision process. It's a SWOT analysis, like where there's strong, where there's weaknesses, where there's opportunities to change, and where there are threats that could really disrupt this. So it would probably be induction, interview, and then movement challenges would be the start. And then once I got that, then I'd put them on a table and based on that information, that would guide me where I'm looking, what I'm checking and assessing. And seldom are injuries myopic. And this is my complaint about ATCs and PTs. Client comes in, my knees bother me, and they just myopically go to the knee. They don't look. Our mantra at ALTIS is what else, where else, what's going on in the neck, in the spine, in the shoulders, in the hips, the ankle, the foot. So the knee may be talking to you, but the driver could be downstream, below the knee. It could be upstream, above the knee. It could be a combo. It could be an upstream influence and a downstream. So both the clients we worked on here this week had upstream issues, in the pelvis and the low back and the femoral hip socket, acetabulum, and they had foot problems, talus, calcaneus, cuneiforms. And, the knee was just paying the price. Somewhere if you have a movement dysfunction, somewhere there's a weak link in your chain. So we'll see a lot of people with medial heel slide on stance, and we know that's probably some talus-driven stuff. And generally people report Liz Frank Jones injuries or Achilles tendinopathy. But, I've got world-class marathoners with big heel slide, no foot Achilles problems, but they have knee problems. So that's their weak link. I have a couple that have no knee problems, no foot Achilles, but they have hip labral problems. So somewhere in that chain, there's a weak link.
Right.
And that's where it's going to manifest.
So if we dove into an ACL, okay, and say you had pretty good control, you still had a surgeon, you still had PT, they still had the sports staff. What are your stages? I hear you talk about the stages. What are your stages? What are your phases? What are you trying to get first? What do they need to? We always talk about bridges. What do they have to check to be able to get from the first stage to the second stage to the third stage?
Yeah, I think I would be surprised if the surgery and the post-surgery inputs and assessments aren't solid. There's so much literature out there. What to do day 1, day 2, day 3 is, first thing in remodeling generally is, 14-day window for the scaffolding and what have you, and then wound healing,
right?
All of that. So generally I want to know what they're prescribing and whatnot, but I stay away from it for the first 14 to 21 days. I might suggest things like a TENS unit, a complex unit,
Right.
to keep muscle stimulation and blood flow and all of that. I'll probably do dietetic interventions.
What do you recommend there?
Well, it just depends on how they eat, what they eat, if there's gaps in their nutritional program.
What are some of the common gaps you see in the nutrition? Sorry to dive
Well,
deep on
people
that,
eat
too.
like shit, fast food and, not a diverse plate. And
You're trying to get small wins with a
Yeah.
young athlete, that does eat like shit. You're not getting enough protein. What are the first wins you're trying to get?
have a big pile of protein, a big pile of carbs, and a big pile of veggies and fruit
Every meal.
every meal.
Simple.
If you can't stomach food, throw it in a blender and make a smoothie.
Yeah.
So that would be some of the initial protocols. Once the wound's healed and whatnot, then I'm probably going to have them do Plan B lifting on the body parts, the other body parts. So you can do single leg work. You can do all kinds of upper body stuff. So I'm going to train the rest of the body like they're not injured.
Right.
So we might be doing single leg bike workouts or
Where do you put the other leg?
on a box.
Okay.
Or we might use a hand crank. So we're going to do cardiopulmonary energy system, CNS work on Plan B. That's the problem with rehab is we try to make it a totally different paradigm, and all these good athletic systems detrain.
Right.
So my Plan B is I'm training you like you're not injured. And if we get to a menu item that's contraindicated because of the injury, then we got to get creative, or we got to avoid that for a while. But there's a lot of other body parts we could be training, a lot of other body systems that we could be training. It's a great window to really hone in on some of those things where maybe there's a gap. And now we've got the opportunity to work on that gap. So a lot of Plan B. So once the wound's healed and whatnot, then I generally put them in a pool like neck deep, so they're offloaded. And we'll do, walking, various walks, lateral walks, backward walks. No problem, no swelling, no pain increase, no gross compensation. Then we might move.
Lateral even that early in the process.
Yeah.
Even though they're
Real short steps.
Okay.
And you always let pain, swelling, and compensation be your red lights. If you're seeing that, okay, that task is they're not ready for it.
How much pain do you allow?
Increasing 2 on a 1 to 10 scale.
Cool.
So no problem, then we might go to dribble in the pool.
Yep.
Rudiment jumps in the pool, real low amplitude, various sprint exercises, skipping and, whatever. No problem, then we go chest deep. No problem, then we go waist deep. It's this master, move on. And when they can get thigh deep, then we segue to land. And so we start on the land with walking exercises. And then
I know it always depends on every athlete, but what in the time frame, when is that usually hitting?
it varies.
That could be 4 weeks, 2 weeks?
Yeah. I've had people on the land, NFL guys, at 6 weeks,
Okay.
walking.
Yep.
I've had high school girls scared to death, maybe 12 weeks.
Okay. So now we're on land, now what are we doing? Sorry to interrupt.
So we just progress. You master, you progress. So walking dribbles, no problem. Any height, any shape, jogging dribbles, no problems. Half-speed dribbles, you just evolve.
How about on the strength side and say the force deck side of things? Like everybody's always worried about how strong the quad is to be able to get to impact, to be able to get to that. Meniscus obviously throws in a whole nother ballgame, but
Yeah.
what
I think, there's a lot of literature out there. I'm not going to go against the literature. So, I think those values are important. But you got to understand when you're doing those moves, you're not translating through space. So you're getting information on that output stationary. That doesn't mean that output's going to transfer when they start translating across the ground. So has value and it's important. If you got big gaps, like you got a problem, you got to address it.
Right.
My complaint is a lot of the addressment is on strength exercises and not therapy inputs and all of that. Maybe the inhibition is a hardware problem. Joints jammed or not able to express itself. So chances are, if you got an ACL, there was trauma in the hip also, and there was trauma in the ankle and the foot. And so if those areas are locked down, then you're going to be restricted when you translate.
Right.
So it's back to that what else, where else. So you're doing total body sweep, not just on the knee in the surgery site. You're sweeping everything in the body that it's moving copacetically. So I think the post-op stuff is pretty good.
Yep.
And I think the strength evaluation stuff is pretty good. And then probably various drop jumps or force deck type information is really good.
What do you?
But it's just one layer.
Right. If you just to focus in on that, because we use those and we love what we get to see from them. What are the main things you're looking at, or that you would like to see if you had access to those?
Well, I work a lot with Dr. Matt Jordan, who's probably the best
In the world.
tendon rehab guy and got the most data on force platforms and video analysis. And I think what really slows down the process or limits the process is rate of eccentric control. So that's a big variable that I'm really honing in on. And it's not going to be great initially, but I need to see change, and I need to see some degree of symmetry, when we're doing single leg testing on that component. What's going on in the able leg versus the injured leg. And then compare that against the norm of people in that sport, that body shape, that gender or whatnot at these various stages. So most of the failures I've seen is people ignored that or downplayed it. They didn't make it as big. Everybody's into how much extension can we get, how much flexion we get. Great, that's important. But as you get later in the process, the ability to eccentric control that joint is huge. And I think that's why we're kind of seeing a trend more towards hamstring development, hamstring testing. But
what are your ABCs on checking the box on that rate of eccentric control? Because we see that all the time, and what works for some athletes doesn't work for others. You know what I mean? If there was a foundation on that.
Well, I don't know that there's, a magic series of exercises or, implementation. I'm biased, but I generally see joint limitation above and below really affecting this.
So with the hip and the ankle.
Yeah. So I would just say, hey, if you're doing good work and you're not moving the ball forward, maybe you want to look at what's going on in the foot, the ankle, and what's going on in the hip. Is there a pelvic bias?
Maybe it's not the quad and the okay.
Well, we know, from like TMG studies, tensiomyographic people that are biased anterior tilt are going to have greater hamstring fatigue. Well, if hamstring fatigue is a big player in this eccentric control and it's chronically exhausted because you got excessive pelvic tilt, well, until you address that, you're rehabbing a very tired hamstring.
At all times. It's just on constant stretch.
So that's another thing. I think this is, in some of the better teams, they're using tensiomyographic to study muscle function. So tensiomyographic, they send a shock into the muscle and it gives you a printout of, peak excitation and the slope.
Is it why they're moving?
No, they're on a bed.
Okay.
And you got an arm and you push a button and it sends current through there. It's kind of like a TENS current.
Oh, okay.
And the muscle will twitch and it gives you a readout on what's going on.
Yeah.
So we look at the slope, time to peak, how high is the peak, and then as the muscle deactivates, what's that curve look like? And so we know from biased anterior tilt people that the hamstrings are always lagging they come in late, they don't get as high a peak, and they decay a lot faster. So, I mean, we've got good data saying that anterior pelvic tilt that's excessive, and they don't have the ability to go retro and neutral depending on task, are going to unduly fatigue the hamstrings. And if you think hamstrings are a big player in this ACL rehab, then you got to respect that you're training a fatigued hamstring. And so it may test weak, not because it's weak, but it's exhausted or it's inhibited. That's another variable, like excessive pelvic tilt, and I've got excessive external rotation of the shank. It's inhibited. The hamstring's not going to fire maximally because it's self-preservation. So I think there's a tendency in a lot of these tests to not look at 3 degrees of movement to ascertain, are we fighting a fatigue problem, an inhibition problem, or is it a strength problem?
Yeah.
And I think it's just human nature. We use strength as a get-out-of-jail card. Any problem we got, strengthen it, and we're going to get out of jail. I wish it was that simple. If strengthening, with the protocols that we see right now going on in North America, if strengthening was the gold standard and the answer for hamstring injuries, why are they going up? In every sport.
Why do you think they're going up?
People don't know how to run. People don't know how to change in direction. People don't know how to control their body.
We're going to come back to the ACL, but along with that, you're talking how kids are being shaped these days, but just because of our lifestyle habits, and then with sitting down on the phone in a screen, you know what I mean, and just how our life is these days. How can we mitigate against that? Like, even like everybody's so kyphotic and they're here and we talk about posture, but pulling a kid into this position is almost painful. Where do you get wins with that?
Well, first up is make them aware that that's putting gas on the fire, you know, why we're fighting some of the battles that we're fighting. So awareness that it's a driver for dysfunction would be the first step. So it's educational, and then giving them little reminders.
Yep.
You know, like say you're gaming, okay, the rule is you got to have your scapula against the back of your chair. And you got to play with seat height so that your knee is slightly above the acetabulum. You know, like you paint them into a corner where they're forced to get better.
Yeah.
So like driving, you know, you got a manual and you're shifting gears. Well, one leg's, you're getting a lot of joint pumping on that SI joint, and the other leg you're not. So it was, you know, we had a girl in the UK that was constant chronic SI problems, and in Europe everything's manual, and she drove an hour to and from practice in London traffic.
So no matter how much work you did, when she got out of the
the
car,
shelf life of the work was
an hour,
a day.
Yeah.
So then we put her in an automatic, and it was happy days.
That's crazy. That's crazy. To go back, I know there's no magic exercises, but on the strength side of things, you know, we typically see the quad and the patellograph with the athletes that we have here. What are your go-to things in the weight room with that? I know you're huge on the reverse walks, on the sled drags. What about in the weight room? What are some of your favorite things as far as?
I think the first stop is, and that a lot of people miss, is when you do a graph, you're now rehabbing 2 areas. So I don't know if you've seen the patellograph, but it's pretty long and it's pretty wide. Like, you've traumatized that patella tendon. Are you giving it as much love as you are the ACL?
Probably not. I've heard you talk about that, and we probably not.
And a hamstring graph, you know, for an interior lineman, maybe not such a big deal, but for a DB or a wide receiver, now you're battling hamstring tendinopathies, hamstring restriction. You know, did you rehab the hamstring in an appropriate manner?
Right.
Or the UCLA guys, you know, in baseball, you know, now they're using more gracilis grafts than they are. You know, why? Because that tendon is a little bit stronger than palmaris, And, how do we rehab that? Well, there's not a lot of research out there on how to rehab a gracilis. Like, I just had a player do that, and I said, what did they tell you for gracilis rehab? And they're like, leg slides. I'm like, that's it. And they're like, yeah. So you've taken a big chunk out of the gracilis, which is a very important stabilizer at mid-stance and running. And you're going to do leg slides, and that's going to be your plan.
Good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That falls a little bit short, in my opinion. So I think, exercise is, I kind of, people go like, where do you come up with some protocols? And I was like, okay, I've got guys in Europe in rugby. I got guys in Europe in soccer. I got NBA guys. I got NFL guys. I got NHL ice hockey guys. I sweep and know, what are they doing? And when I see common denominator in all those groups, I'm like, those are KPIs. They got to be in there because everybody's valuing them. And then when I see one group's doing something and none of the other groups, then I might call that group, why are you doing this? And is it really making a difference from what you used to do and all of that? So you kind of dig down, like, why are you doing that? Why is it added in there? Is there ROI on this? Or are you just doing it because some hypothesis you got, or is it eye candy?
Yeah. When within those and with what you see, a huge thing for like a debate here where we're at with the athletes that we have is going from linear to change of direction. Mm-hmm. Like not even being able to do anything frontal in the early stages, which sometimes we try to work on just, getting in the right positions, doing those things, but sometimes it's super frowned upon. Like we shouldn't even touch them right there, even if we don't agree with that. What do you have to see to be able to let somebody go into those frontal planes or change directions or cut and decelerate?
Well, again, it's simple to complex. It's slow to fast. So I might just do walking, where kind of a walk through. Like, okay, where's your pre-penultimate step? Where are your body parts? Pause. Okay, where's your penultimate step?
And we're just doing this linear at first.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, so it would be a walking tree, whether you're doing a lateral move or a 45-degree move or a 180 move. It'd be a walking speed, maybe walking pause at first. So we're going to get to that key moment and pause. Are you stable? Do you have any pain? All right, move out of it. So an injury sweep we did in skiers way back downhill, trying to ascertain where the injuries occur. In a skier, when they're going around a gate, we call the early part of that the entrance. And then where they pivot the most, we call that the apex. And then as they leave the gate, we call that the exit. And so injuries generally occur in one of those three zones. They may lose a ski coming into the gate, they may lose the ski when they're pivoting, or they may lose the outer ski when they release. So I think it's the same thing in rehab and change in direction. How are they at entering that movement you want? How are they at the moment where there's a radical change in direction? And then how are they at exiting that movement? So on Liz Frank guys in the NFL, it's common to see them do circle runs, and generally those circle runs are the radius is too tight. It needs to be big. Go real slow. Okay, they look good. All right, let's go a little faster. Like, don't tighten the radius until you get mastery there. But generally what we'll see on these Liz Frank and Jones fractures is they have really good entrance mechanics, and then they get pitter-patter. And then they have really good exit mechanics. So their problem is the apex of turning. So you're doing an ergonomic assessment of the task. How are they looking coming into it during the most radical change in direction, and then how are they looking exiting from that? So walking, and that's why we pause. We pause in the apex. Like, are they stable in the apex? So we might walk in, do a 45-degree pivot, but before we push off, we pause. You okay? Are you where you should be? Okay, exit. no problem, then we might walk through that. And then a bunch of those, no problem, we might go jogging speed. No problem, then we might go half speed, just.
That progression, is that, I know it also depends, but is that in one session you might be able to get there?
No.
Yeah, so that would be over a period of time. So they might do the walking for an extended period of time.
Yeah, they might. And again, pain, swelling,
Right.
and compensation is your driver.
Okay.
And replicability, like, can they repeat it?
Yep.
So I've had some guys with ACLs, 2-3 sessions walking with pause, they're ready to go walk, unpause. 2-3 sessions like that, they're ready to jog, and then we hit a wall. And so maybe we're 10 sessions at jogging speed before we can go half speed.
Gotcha.
So I'd love to tell you it's symmetrical,
Right.
but it's not.
Do you ever add, there's different philosophies on resistance with sprinting early stages because they say it takes some weight off their body. When they first start working their way into some excels and running like that, do you add resistance early, or is that just another, constraint that you don't put in there?
I mean, logically, a little bit of resistance it's going to change your extension dynamics.
Okay.
You're going to extend the hip, the knee, and the ankle and the foot differently under load than free. So that could be a win, it could be a negative.
Okay.
So my first stop is, okay, if we put light resistance, does it bastardize their mechanics? Well, if it does, then we're not going to use weight. And then we'll slowly increase weight until we see a real radical change in their mechanics to the negative, and we go, okay, no heavier than this, maybe a little bit lighter than this.
So you do add it in, but you got to be very, very careful on the weight, as long as it doesn't ruin the mechanics.
Yeah. And that would be true whether we're using that on an able kid, too. Heavy resistance is going to help you your first 3 or 4 steps. But after that, it's a negative.
It's going to F you on the rest, yeah.
Yeah.
When you were on the Move the Needle podcast, one thing you talked about, and I've heard you talk about it before and I loved it, but was going from the closed chain, this is in the late stage, going from the closed chain to the super open chain, huge cognitive load, getting them to that, getting that bridge is one of the hardest things we have to do, especially because, like you've said before, PT cleared us here, then we get to work with the strength side, and then we give to the sport coach, and then it's like, okay, they're cleared, we can just go rip it. What?
I would say in the NFL, NBA, and NHL, that's where most of the re-injury occurs, is in that window.
Why?
Because they probably lost capacity because they didn't do a lot of good Plan B stuff. So they lost some capacity. They definitely lost capacity on doing those kind of movements. Tissue tolerance, is subpar.
Right.
So capacity and tolerance are your first few landmines that you're going to step on. There may be fear, inhibition. So how do you do threat reduction exercises or activities where you reduce that fear?
Give me an example. How about with Darby with the soccer ball where she's looking over her head?
She doesn't have fear. So say your ACL and you put them on a sled.
Okay.
They're going to be afraid to fully extend, aren't they?
Every time.
So how do you reduce that threat? So maybe a lighter load, a little slower accel. Did that feel okay? Yeah, it was okay. Well, let's spend some time there and get some confidence that at this speed, under this load, you're okay. Then we move.
Love it.
So Jamie and Scott Livingston, a couple in Montreal.
Stud. Yeah, they're awesome.
Their whole paradigm's about threat reduction. How do we reduce? Because threat reduction is subconscious by and large, and it's human nature to have. It's a defense mechanism.
Right.
Like I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. Right.
I'm afraid. I'm going to get re-injured. And if it was real traumatic, it's not just our side. I mean, we need sport psychologists in there because there could be some PTSD stuff going on.
we worked with an athlete together that's one of the hardest things to, one, talk about, with the athlete, and try to bring in a third party like that that's a battle I still struggle with.
Well, I mean, you build these progressions trying to reduce threat, but if it's not moving the ball forward, then, like this is above my pay grade. I mean, there's cognitive, psychological processes that are inhibiting their ability to take risk.
Just to go on that, what do you do if the athlete's not open and willing?
Then I explain to them that we're probably going to stay stuck here for a long period of time. And that's their option. I'm not going to force it. I'm going to just say, realistic expectation. I've had, 8 athletes that have resisted mental training, and their return to play was stunted 10 weeks. Do you want to give up 10 weeks? Or a year?
Right.
Or 2 years?
Yeah.
Like, you've had ACL players, and you're looking at them 2 years later, and they're on the pitch, and you see that they're not ready to sell out.
Still. Yep.
Even though everything you do here at the center is green light. That info is not enough for that person's brain to reorganize and say, I'm okay.
How often do you see that?
All thirds.
Oh, yeah. 30% of the time.
And it's not gender specific. You would think women might be a little bit more fearful, but it's not.
When they're in that late stage and we're starting to reintroduce them to practice and competition, is there, I know it depends on each position and what level they're at, but what's the time, they obviously have to master it, like we said. It's simple to complex, but as they start mastering it, how long until you feel like they're ready to compete? Maybe the full game, instead of modified minutes and modified load management.
Well, I think that's the first stop. Do you have a good relationship with the coaches who say, like, we need to modify minutes.
Right.
We need to modify the practice schedule a little bit. That's super important. Otherwise, you're leaping.
Yep.
And then I would do a really good assessment in those modified minutes and practices and whatnot. Are we seeing an improvement in tolerance and an improvement in capacity? If so, then we bump. But if we see a decay, then we know we're not ready yet.
Yeah. With that, we're lucky to work with a lot of organizations where with the doc, the PT, and the AT, and the coach, we get to work really well with. And then we have a few times where it's kind of stay in your own lane because we're S&C guys, we're PE majors, I've heard you talk about it a bunch, but how do you deal with that to where you have the athlete and you're I've heard you multiple times, like your number one goal is to do no harm, right? Is to protect that athlete. But you don't have a lot of say in that, and you got to stay in your own lane. You're not a doctor, you're not a PT, how do you handle that?
Well, I'd love to tell you I've got a really good game plan on that. I think the first step is to try to develop relationships where you're getting resistance. Improve that relationship with those people, away from the problem. Coffee, dinner, beer.
Something.
Just boom. And then start sharing research and papers and say, I notice in European soccer and in ice hockey, they kind of do this. What do you think about that? Or why do you think they're doing that and we're not seeing it here or whatever, where you're not attacking them. You're asking good questions, maybe to improve or open a conversation. So a lot of it is you've got to build your credibility index with that person. How do you do that? That you're not just a Yahoo, that you got a network of people that you're bouncing ideas off of, that you know what's going on,
Right.
The gold standard in the U.S. versus the gold standard in Europe versus the gold standard in Australia could be really different, but they all claim that it's the gold standard. So how AFL teams rehab hamstrings in Australia versus Premier League soccer versus NFL versus MLB, totally different. Are any of them knocking it out of the park? No. But they're totally different. So maybe you're saying, well, they're doing this, and these guys are doing this, or this. Are we missing something here? Or are we beating a dead horse? It's like Nordic hamstrings, they've been in vogue for over a decade now, and hamstring injuries are going up in every sport, at every level of sport or whatnot. Are these things really moving the ball forward?
Do you never even use the Nordics, even just for a strengthening exercise?
I personally don't.
Okay.
I mean, philosophically, to me, a Nordic is a slow, eccentric movement around the knee joint. Hamstrings are two-joint muscle. And you're moving translationally through space. A Nordic, you're standing still. There's a lot of things like, is that a total win?
More of an RDL than single leg RDL?
Yeah, or, running. Best rehab for hamstring issues is running.
Yeah. Sometimes, again, that's something that we get a lot of pushback on, stay in your own lane.
Yeah.
The dribbles have been nice because we're not running. We're dribbling. We're working our way through the progressions.
Yeah.
Everybody always asks, what book to get. I was thinking with you, because you have a insane amount of knowledge, but what about number one book on gait and biomechanics? Is that the Coach T one?
Yeah, well, Mechanics of Athletics by Dyson. I think if you're really interested in gait, I would study what people are doing in rehab, like stroke patients, TBI injuries, what are the progressions, what are they measuring, what do they define as KPIs?
Okay.
I mean, gait is a global term for how we're moving across the surface of the earth. We're bipedal. So, a touchdown at mid-stance, a toe off, and recovery and all of that. That's gait cycle analysis. So what are people looking at? What are they measuring? What do they define good? What do they define poor?
Yeah.
Those would be areas, those are areas that I'm very active in, that I'm constantly reading about.
What about top book or one book that a young coach should be reading for anatomy?
I think Anatomy of Movement is a really nice, simple book that a layman can grasp. It's by a French therapist that work with their National Ballet program. And it's got really good drawings and explanations. Body Movable is another great book.
Okay. How about on the strength and conditioning side?
I'm kind of old school. I grew up reading Schmidt-Bleicher in Germany and Bosco and Comey, and studied a lot of what Olympic lifting coaches were doing, because I thought Olympic lifting was a little closer to athletic movement than maybe powerlifting. There's a lot of good stuff. I read Mel Siff several times. Thought he was really good. And I think there are a lot of solid books out there. And again, I'm a little biased, and I'm going to beat the drum. I think probably give strength training too much power. We use it as a get-out-of-jail card for everything. And it's a little more complex to that. And you can get in the question is, how strong is strong enough? And I think strength is intriguing because it's easy to measure. And so the coaches see numbers changing, the athlete sees a number changing, and they're like, okay, this is improving, so I'm going to improve.
Right.
Well, I grew up in that era where you got bigger and stronger, and you didn't get faster in football. I don't know if you remember that era, but,
Still a thing.
Yeah.
Bigger, faster, stronger is still a huge thing.
Yeah, well, you get bigger, you get stronger, but I don't know if you get faster.
Yeah.
Saw too many programs where a kid come in running 4.5 in high school, and he runs 4.7 when he leaves 4 years later.
I got to admit, I've done it. Strength is just so easy to go attack and then get buy-in and get wins, and coach wants to see it, mom and dad want to see it. We did it in the past, so it's easy to do what has been taught, and that's been a huge paradigm shift for us as well in the movement and the speed side of things.
I think it's easy to program, too, especially if you're doing numbers.
Right.
So like we were talking now in the NFL, we're seeing more options on the menu items. So, a guy's got a leg day. Is he going to do single leg lifting or double leg lifting? Is he going to squat? Is he going to hex bar? Is he going to do Romanian deadlifts? Is he going to do step ups? So we're seeing a more diverse menu item.
Right. To go back to the books, how about soft tissue?
Well, currently I'm really intrigued by fascia.
Yep.
And so there's a lot. Schlepp's got a really good book out right now where he's put together about 20 authors on various papers on fascial research and histology and, movement and cadaver studies and piezoelectrics and fluid dynamics and you name it. So that's a book I'm on my fourth reread right now.
So the last few times we've chatted, you've brought the fascia up way more than normal. What have you changed since learning more about it in your protocols? Or what do you see differently?
Well, for me, fascia operates on a different electrical system. So you have the CNS system and then the fascia system, totally different. It's a parallel system, but piezoelectronics, it communicates in a whole different modality. And we have a lot of systems in the body that communicate, and we don't understand how. Like peptides talk to hormones, talk to immune movers, and so I think in probably early days in understanding there are a lot of communication systems in the body, and they're talking to one another, and they have influence on one another. And so when dynamic ultrasound came out, we would kind of do an MRI and we'd see fluid in an area or signal in an area and we go, well, it's a grade 2 hamstring tear. And then we'd go ultrasound and all the fluid was in the fascial sheath. It wasn't in the muscle belly. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to a hamstring injury than it's the muscle.
Right.
So that's kind of been the prompt that the more I study and the more I tap into the network, there are areas that we didn't see change because we were approaching it from a muscular paradigm, where now that we approach it from a fascial paradigm, we're seeing bigger return on change.
Yeah. It's definitely a weakness of ours that we're going to have to dive into. Schlepp.
Yeah.
Love it.
So the fascial people you want to read is Schlepp. He's from old Germany. The Stecco's in Italy.
Okay, you've talked
and
about
then Guy Voyer, who sadly passed away recently. Those, and then in the U.S., Thomas Myers, the anatomy trained guy. So those, if you want to get your feet wet, those are for people that, are. What's interesting, there was an osteopath in England named Leon Shaitow that was talking about this in the 80s.
I have his book. Yeah, you recommended his book, yeah.
And then James Oshman was he's a Woodholz researcher in Massachusetts, and he wrote energy medicine papers and all of this about what was going on. And his deal was a collagen matrix. So how do forces and communication transmit between tendons, ligaments, fascia, and fluid dynamics, water, body 70% water, how is that water transport affecting it? So early days, in this area, but it's not new. I mean, Shaitow and Oshman were talking about this decades ago. Just everybody thought they were idiots.
Going on that then in the last book, because you always talk about history. And I've never asked you on one of those books, and I haven't dove into the history much, but if there was one book that we could read, on the history of what we're doing on the performance side of things, what's one that we could get after, or maybe a couple?
Ooh.
That's your biggest, last time I met with you, you were reading a German strength training book from the 1800s.
Yeah.
Doing the same med ball workouts we're doing now.
Yeah, I don't think there's an encyclopedia or a compendium.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to go into different epochs and read what was going on and, kind of build your own encyclopedia, if you will.
Okay. Last question. So we have some awesome guests coming on, mainly because you're on here, but if you could leave them with one question that they have to question themselves about and what they do in their practice and their performance, what would you ask them?
Who's in your network and how diverse is it?
Love it.
Lone Rangers seldom reach the mountaintop. You know, people hike to Mount Everest. They have Sherpas with them.
Can't do it alone.
No.
Dan, you're the man, dude. I can't thank you enough. We wouldn't be where we're at if it weren't for you, man. Thanks for everything.
I respect a lot what you guys do here, and it's been a pretty amazing week to watch it unroll.
Go catch some fish tomorrow.
Yeah,
Huh?
I'm going to do that.
Hell yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.